During dinner, my newly married daughter said loudly, "You're a failure. That's why Mom found someone better." My son-in-law laughed and my wife looked embarrassed. A week later, they were all homeless and broke. Even my wife's boyfriend showed up at my door. My reaction left everyone in panic. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Thomas, and at 59 years old, I thought I knew what humiliation felt like. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened during what should have been a celebration dinner for my daughter's recent marriage. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place Joyce always insisted we go to when we had family occasions. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, waiters who spoke in hushed tones. I'd made the reservation myself, as I always did. Paid for it too, naturally. That's what I did. I paid, I provided, I stayed quiet. Amelia looked radiant in her new designer dress, the one I'd bought her for the honeymoon. 26 years old and married to Raymond for exactly 3 weeks. Raymond sat beside her, adjusting his watch, also a gift from me, and checking his phone every few minutes, like he had somewhere more important to be. Joyce fidgeted with her wedding ring, sliding it up and down her finger, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past year. I noticed these things. I noticed everything, actually, but I'd learned to keep my observations to myself. "Dad, you're being quiet tonight," Amelia said, cutting into her $40 steak. "More quiet than usual, I mean." I smiled, the same smile I'd perfected over 27 years of marriage. "Just enjoying watching you two. It's nice to see you so happy." Raymond snorted, actually snorted. "Happy and successful," he added, gesturing around the restaurant. "Not everyone can appreciate the finer things in life." There was something in his tone, something that made my chest tighten. Joyce's fidgeting intensified. She knew what was coming before I did. "Speaking of success," Amelia set down her fork and looked directly at me. Her eyes had that calculating look she'd inherited from her mother. "Raymond and I have been talking." "About what, sweetheart?" The sweetheart came out automatically. Even as my stomach began to churn, even as I felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over me like a heavy coat. "About you, actually." She dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin. "About how you've never really achieved anything." The words hung in the air like smoke. The couple at the next table glanced over. I felt heat creeping up my neck. "Amelia," Joyce whispered, but there was no real reproach in her voice. Just embarrassment that her daughter was saying out loud what they had apparently been discussing in private. "No, Mom. Someone needs to say it." Amelia's voice grew stronger, more confident. "Raymond's family built a construction empire. His dad owns half the commercial real estate downtown, and you—" She looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't far from it. "You work at the same insurance office you've worked at for 20 years, making the same salary, living the same small life." Raymond was grinning now, enjoying the show. He leaned back in his chair like he was watching his favorite movie. "That's not fair, Amelia," I said quietly. "I've provided for this family. I've given you everything you've ever wanted." "With Mom's help," she shot back. "Mom's the one who made sure I got into the right schools, who helped me meet the right people. Mom's the one who taught me not to settle for mediocrity." Joyce's face was red now, but she wasn't stopping this. She was letting it happen. "And that's why," Amelia continued, her voice rising, just enough for nearby tables to hear, "Mom found someone who actually appreciates her worth, someone who doesn't just exist." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. The sound of conversations, clinking silverware, everything became muffled except for my daughter's voice. "You're a failure, Dad. That's why Mom arranged for someone else." Raymond laughed. Not a chuckle, not an uncomfortable clearing of the throat. A full, genuine laugh, like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. I looked at Joyce, really looked at her. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. "Joyce?" My voice sounded strange, even to me. "Thomas, we can talk about this at home," she whispered. "No," Amelia said firmly. "We're talking about it now. Raymond and I think it's actually healthy for everyone. You get to keep pretending you're still married. Mom gets to be with someone who actually has ambition, and Dad," she shrugged, "Dad gets to keep doing whatever it is he does." The waiter approached to refill our water glasses. The normalcy of it, ice clinking, water pouring, the polite, "Excuse me." felt surreal against the backdrop of my life imploding. "Does he have a name?" I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. "David," Joyce said quietly. "His name is David." Raymond leaned forward, clearly enjoying himself. "He owns 3 restaurants downtown. Real successful guy. Takes Joyce to places that actually matter." I nodded slowly, processing this information with strange detachment. 27 years of marriage, 26 years of raising Amelia, all reduced to this moment in an overpriced restaurant where my own family was explaining why I wasn't enough. "How long?" I asked. "Does it matter?" Amelia snapped. "The point is, Mom deserves better." "We all do." I reached for my wallet, pulled out my credit card, and set it on the table. The same credit card I'd used to pay for Amelia's wedding dress, the honeymoon, the down payment on their apartment. "Dinner's on me," I said, standing up. "As usual." Joyce finally looked at me then. For just a second I saw something that might have been regret, or maybe just embarrassment that it had happened this way in public. I walked out of that restaurant feeling strangely light. Not devastated, not angry, just light. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to move without that weight. But as I drove home alone, leaving them to finish their expensive meal, something else began to grow in my chest. Not rage exactly, something colder, something more patient. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they'd figured me out completely. They had no idea what they'd just awakened. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that night. Not smaller or larger, just different. Like I was seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The expensive furniture Joyce had insisted on, the artwork Amelia had picked out during her college years, the Persian rugs that cost more than most people's monthly salary. All of it paid for by the failure who worked at the same insurance office for 20 years. Joyce wasn't home yet. Probably having drinks with David, celebrating their successful humiliation of the man who had been paying for her lifestyle. I poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff I kept hidden in my study, and sat in my chair. The leather chair that squeaked slightly when I leaned back. The one Joyce always complained about but never bothered to replace because it was mine. I opened my laptop and began to type. Not frantically, not emotionally, methodically. The way I'd learned to do everything over the past 2 decades. First, I canceled Amelia's credit cards, all 3 of them. The ones I'd given her for emergencies that had somehow become her primary source of shopping funds. The ones currently carrying a balance of over $15,000 from her honeymoon spending spree. Then I canceled Joyce's cards. The platinum one she used for her salon appointments, her lunches with friends, her shopping trips. The one that had charged over $8,000 just last month to places I'd never heard of. I made a list as I worked, not an angry list, not a vindictive one, just a practical inventory of financial reality. The house, mortgage in my name, property taxes paid from my account for 18 years. The cars, Joyce's BMW and Amelia's sedan, both loans co-signed by me because their credit wasn't sufficient. The country club membership, my name, my bank account, automatic withdrawal every month for 7 years. Amelia's apartment with Raymond. I'd paid the security deposit and first 3 months' rent as a wedding gift. Joyce's expensive gym membership, my credit card, monthly charges for 4 years. The family cell phone plan, 6 lines under my name, including ones for Joyce's mother and Amelia's college roommate who'd never bothered to get her own plan. I made a few phone calls. Quiet conversations with people who knew me professionally, who'd worked with me long enough to understand that when Thomas made a request, it was usually for good reason. "Hi, this is Thomas Hayward. I need to make some changes to my accounts." The financial advisor sounded surprised to hear from me so late. "Of course, Thomas. What can I help you with?" "I need to transfer some assets into a separate account. Tonight, if possible." There was a pause. "That's unusual timing. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I'm just making some overdue adjustments." By midnight, I'd moved 67% of our joint savings into an account that only I could access. Not all of it. I wasn't trying to leave Joyce destitute, but enough to ensure that the woman who thought I was such a failure would have to budget for the first time in decades. I'd also made some other calls. Quiet inquiries to people who might know things about restaurants downtown, about successful businessmen named David who took married women to places that actually matter. David Chen, owner of Chen's Bistro, Romano's Kitchen, and The Glass Door. Divorced twice, currently in litigation with his second ex-wife over alimony payments. Rumored to have cash flow problems despite the impressive facade. Interesting. Joyce came home at 2:15 in the morning. I heard her trying to be quiet, slipping off her heels in the foyer, setting her purse down carefully. She must have been surprised to see the light still on in my study. "Thomas?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "You're still awake?" "Couldn't sleep," I said without looking up from my laptop. "How was your evening?" She appeared in the doorway, still wearing the dress she'd worn to dinner, the one that cost $400 and made her feel young again. "About tonight," she started, then stopped. Emilia shouldn't have said those things, but she wasn't wrong? Joyce wrapped her arms around herself. "It's complicated." "How complicated?" "You're sleeping with another man, and our daughter thinks I'm a failure. Seems pretty straightforward to me." She flinched at the directness. Joyce preferred things unspoken, issues that simmered quietly rather than bubbled over into actual confrontation. "David makes me feel," she searched for the words, "alive, important, like I matter." I finally looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd been married to for 27 years, who'd shared my bed, my dreams, my life, who'd apparently decided that none of it was enough. "And I don't make you feel those things. You make me feel safe," she said quietly. "Stable, provided for, but not alive." No, the honesty was almost refreshing. After years of polite conversations and careful silences, we were finally saying true things to each other. "What do you want, Joyce? A divorce?" She looked startled. I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead." "You should probably start thinking about it." She stood there for another minute, maybe waiting for me to get angry, to shout, to demand she end things with David. When I didn't, she quietly said goodnight and went upstairs. I stayed in my study until dawn, making more calls, sending more emails. By the time Joyce woke up, I'd already left for work, but not before leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Joyce, your credit cards were declined this morning. There seems to be some kind of banking error. You should probably call them." Thomas. Of course, there was no banking error, but she'd figure that out soon enough. At work, I sat in my small office with my modest desk and my 20-year-old filing cabinet, the same office my daughter had described with such contempt just 12 hours earlier. I opened my computer and reviewed my portfolio. 17 properties across 3 states, a silent partnership in 2 construction companies, investment accounts worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, all carefully managed, all quietly accumulated over 20 years of mediocre work at the same insurance office. The office where I'd learned about risk assessment, about reading people, about understanding what really mattered in contracts and legal documents. The office where I'd built relationships with clients who became business partners, who offered opportunities to a man who listened more than he spoke and never made anyone feel threatened by his success. My phone rang. Joyce, probably. "Thomas, my cards aren't working. None of them." "That's strange," I said calmly. "Have you been making any unusual purchases lately?" "Don't play games with me. What did you do?" "I made some financial adjustments for security purposes." "Security purposes?" "Well, if you're planning to leave me for David, it seemed prudent to protect our assets during the transition." Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, processing. "I never said I was leaving you. You didn't have to." Another pause. "Fix this, Thomas. Fix it right now." "I'll consider it," I said, and hung up. Then I made one more call. To Raymond's employer, a mid-level construction firm that had been struggling with contract renewals. "Hi, this is Thomas Hayward. I'm calling about the Morrison project." By lunchtime, Raymond would be having a very difficult conversation with his supervisor about budget cuts and staffing reductions. But I wasn't finished, not even close. 3 days after the dinner, Joyce was standing in my study doorway again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Emilia was beside her, and for the first time in years, my daughter looked uncertain. "Dad, we need to talk," Emilia said, though her usual confidence was notably absent. I looked up from the property management documents I'd been reviewing. 3 new rental agreements that needed my signature, lease renewals on commercial spaces downtown, and a purchase offer on a small apartment complex that had just come on the market. Of course, what's on your mind? Joyce stepped forward, clutching a stack of papers, bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents. Thomas, what's happening? The mortgage company called. They said our payment was late. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. That's strange. I've never missed a payment in 18 years. They said the automatic payment was declined because the account was closed. Ah, I nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I did close that account. Security reasons, like I mentioned. Emilia's eyes narrowed. What security reasons? I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. Sit down, both of you. They sat, but reluctantly. Joyce perched on the edge of her chair like she was ready to run. Emilia crossed her arms, defensive but clearly shaken. I've been doing some financial reorganization, I began calmly. It occurred to me after our dinner conversation that perhaps I should take a more active role in managing our assets. Our assets? Joyce's voice was sharp. You moved money without telling me. I moved my money, I corrected, from accounts that I opened, with funds that I earned. That's not how marriage works, Thomas. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder, thick, organized, tabs marking different sections. Actually, Joyce, let me show you exactly how our marriage has worked. I opened to the first section and pulled out a document. This is the deed to our house. Notice anything interesting about the names listed? Joyce leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. Her face went pale. Just your name, Emilia whispered. That's right, just my name, because when we bought this house 19 years ago, Joyce's credit score was 437. She had defaulted student loans, 3 maxed-out credit cards, and a car repossession. No bank would approve her for a mortgage. Joyce's hands were shaking now. Thomas, you don't need to. I think I do. I turned to the next section. These are the car loan documents, both vehicles, again just my name, because Joyce couldn't qualify for financing. Emilia was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. But Mom always said, your mother says a lot of things. I pulled out another stack. These are bank statements going back 5 years. Notice the deposit patterns? Every paycheck, every bonus, every investment return, all from my employment, my business ventures. Business ventures? Joyce's voice was barely a whisper. I smiled. Not the careful, placating smile I'd worn for decades. A real smile. Did you think I spent 20 years at the insurance office just answering phones and filing papers? I turned my laptop screen toward them. This is Hayward Property Holdings. 17 rental properties across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Current monthly income, $43,000. Emilia's mouth fell open. This is Silent Partner Investments. I own minority stakes in 6 different construction companies, including the one that built half the commercial district downtown. Annual dividends last year, $187,000. Joyce was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. And this, I pulled out a final document, is a partnership agreement with Chen Development Group. We've been buying and renovating distressed properties for 8 years. David Chen and I are actually business partners, Joyce. Have been for quite some time. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on my desk, the distant sound of a lawnmower outside, Joyce's rapid breathing. That's impossible, Emilia finally said. You work at an insurance office. I do work at an insurance office, 40 hours a week handling claims and policies. But I also use that position to identify property damage, to understand real estate risks, to build relationships with contractors and developers. I closed the laptop. The insurance job was never the career, Emilia. It was the foundation. Joyce stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. David never mentioned. He never said he knew you. David doesn't know I'm your husband. Chen is a common name, and we conduct business through corporate entities. He knows me as T. Hayward, silent partner and investor. I watched my wife process this information, watched her realize that the man she'd been having an affair with was actually in business with the husband she considered a failure. How much? Emilia's voice was small now, not the confident tone she'd used at dinner. How much money do you have? I opened a different file on my computer, one labeled personal net worth. As of yesterday's market close, approximately $4.7 million. Joyce sat down heavily in her chair. Amelia just stared at me. But we live so simply, Amelia whispered. You never acted like what? Like I was rich? I shrugged. Rich people who act rich usually don't stay rich very long. Besides, I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing special to offer. Thomas, Joyce started, but I held up a hand. Let me finish, because this is where things get interesting. I pulled out another document. This is an eviction notice. Since the house is in my name and I've decided that I no longer want to share it with people who consider me a failure, you have 30 days to find alternative housing. You can't do that, Amelia said, but her voice was uncertain. I can, and I am. The lease on your apartment with Raymond expires next week. I won't be renewing it or providing rent money. The car payments are due in 6 days. Since Joyce can't qualify for the loans, they'll be repossessed, unless you can pay the remaining balances. I stood up, walking around the desk to face them directly. You wanted to know what success looks like? This is what success looks like. It looks like having options when other people think they've trapped you. It looks like being able to walk away when your own family decides you're not worth their respect. Joyce was crying now, quiet tears running down her cheeks. Thomas, please, we can work this out. Can we? Because 3 days ago, you told me that David makes you feel alive in ways I never could. Your daughter publicly called me a failure and suggested that your affair was justified because I'm mediocre. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. I could fix all of this right now. One call to restore your credit cards, another call to transfer money for the house payment, a third call to ensure Amelia's lifestyle continues uninterrupted. They both looked at me hopefully. But I'm not going to do that. Hope died in their eyes. Because for the first time in 27 years, I'm finally seeing who you really are when you think you have power over me. And I don't like what I see. Amelia jumped up from her chair. This is insane. You're punishing us for being honest? No, bye, Amelia. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. You said I was a failure who didn't deserve respect. So I'm removing myself from the equation. Now you can succeed without me holding you back. Joyce wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup. What about David? If you're business partners, I smiled again, and this time it wasn't pleasant. David's about to have some very serious cash flow problems. You see, T. Hayward is pulling out of several joint ventures, effective immediately. The color drained from her face as she realized the implications. You're destroying his business to hurt me? I'm making sound financial decisions to protect my investments. David's restaurants have been losing money for 6 months. His divorce settlements are bleeding him dry. Getting involved with a married woman whose husband might find out? That's just bad risk management. I walked to the door of my study and opened it. You have 27 days left in this house. I suggest you use them wisely. As they filed out, I heard Amelia whisper to her mother, "How did we not know?" Because you never bothered to ask, I thought. You never bothered to wonder how a man with a modest salary could afford the life you'd been living. But they were about to learn exactly how much that life had cost. 2 weeks later, I was having my morning coffee when the frantic knocking started. Not the polite rap of someone making a social call, but the desperate pounding of someone in crisis. I took my time answering. Through the peephole, I could see Raymond standing on my front porch, still in his work clothes from yesterday. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he was being followed. When I opened the door, he practically fell forward. "Thomas, thank God you're home. I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I gestured him inside, noting how his hands were shaking as he wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Coffee?" I offered. "No, I don't have time for coffee. Thomas, something's happened. Something terrible." I sat down in my chair, the same squeaky leather one Joyce had always complained about. "What's wrong, Raymond?" He paced across my living room, running his hands through his hair. "I lost my job last Friday. They said it was budget cuts, but I know it was more than that. They specifically mentioned that some of their major contracts weren't being renewed. I'm sorry to hear that. But that's not the worst part." He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "Amelia's pregnant." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Congratulations." "Congratulations?" His voice cracked. "Thomas, we can't afford a baby. We can't afford anything." Amelia's been trying to use her credit cards, but they're all maxed out, and the companies won't increase her limits. We had to move out of our apartment because we couldn't make rent. Where are you staying? With my parents, in their basement. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what's funny? A month ago, Amelia was telling everyone how successful we were, how we'd married into the right family. Now, we're sleeping on an air mattress in a basement that smells like mildew. I watched him carefully. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in Raymond before. Genuine fear. What do you want from me, Raymond? I want to understand what happened. One day everything was fine, the next day it's like our entire world collapsed. Amelia says you moved money around, that you cut off her cards, but that doesn't explain why I lost my job or why nobody will hire me. I leaned back in my chair. Have you considered that maybe your qualifications weren't as strong as you thought? His face flushed red. Don't play games with me, Thomas. I know you did something. I made some financial adjustments to protect my assets during a difficult time in my marriage. That's not illegal. What about my job? What about it? The contracts that weren't renewed. I heard rumors that T. Hayward pulled funding from several projects. I smiled slightly. Ah, you've been doing some research. Are you T. Hayward? I am. Raymond stared at me like I'd just told him I was the Easter Bunny. That's impossible. You work at an insurance office? I work at an insurance office, and I own several businesses, and I control more money than you'll probably see in your lifetime. I stood up and walked to the window. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was subdued. Amelia doesn't know I'm here. I assumed not. She's not handling this well. The money problems, the pregnancy, having to live with my parents. She keeps saying, this is all your fault, that you're punishing her for being honest about your failures. What do you think? Raymond sat down heavily on the couch. I think I married a woman who's used to getting everything she wants, and I thought I could provide that for her. I thought marrying into your family meant, I don't know, stability, security. And now? Now I'm 28 years old, unemployed, about to be a father, and living in my parents' basement with a wife who blames everyone but herself for our problems. I turned away from the window to face him. That's a difficult situation. Thomas, I'm begging you, help us. Help Amelia. She's your daughter. Is she? The question hung in the air between us. Raymond's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean that for the past month I've been wondering what it means to be family. Amelia made it very clear that she considers me a failure, an embarrassment. She publicly supported her mother's affair because she felt I didn't deserve better treatment. So I'm asking you, in what way is she my daughter? Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because if she's my daughter, she would have defended me when her mother humiliated me in public. If she's my daughter, she would have called to apologize instead of demanding that I restore her credit cards. If she's my daughter, she would be here right now instead of sending her husband to negotiate on her behalf. She's proud, Raymond said weakly. She's selfish? There's a difference. Before Raymond could respond, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach tighten. Not Joyce, not Amelia. David Chen. Excuse me, I said to Raymond. I need to take this. Thomas, this is David Chen. We need to talk. Immediately. Good morning, David. What can I do for you? Don't play dumb with me. I know who you are. I walked into my study, leaving Raymond in the living room. I'm not sure what you mean. I know you're Joyce's husband. I know you've been sabotaging my businesses, and I know you're the reason my restaurants are about to go under. That's a serious accusation, David. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. My lawyer looked into the contract cancellations, the sudden investor withdrawals. It all traces back to companies owned by Thomas Hayward. I sat down at my desk, opening my laptop to check some numbers. Your restaurants have been operating at a loss for 8 months, David. Your divorce settlement payments are eating up most of your liquid assets. Getting romantically involved with a married woman was just another bad decision in a series of bad decisions. You son of a bitch. Actually, my mother was a lovely woman who taught me the value of patience and strategic thinking. There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice was different, desperate. What do you want? I want you to stop sleeping with my wife. And if I do that, you'll restore the business partnerships? No. The business partnerships are over regardless. You're a bad investment, David. But if you stop sleeping with my wife, I won't actively work to destroy what's left of your restaurants. Another pause. She told me you were a nobody, a boring insurance salesman who couldn't satisfy her. Joyce tells people what they want to hear. It's one of her talents. She's going to be devastated when I end things. That's not my problem. Thomas, listen. Maybe we can work something out. I could talk to Joyce, convince her to go back to you, help you save your marriage. I almost laughed. David, my marriage ended the night my daughter called me a failure in public, and my wife sat there nodding in agreement. I'm not trying to save it. I'm trying to end it on my terms. Then what do you want? I want my life back. I want to stop pretending that being a good husband and father matters when my family sees those qualities as weaknesses. I could hear David breathing heavily through the phone. You're insane. No, David, I'm finally sane. For the first time in 27 years, I'm making decisions based on what's best for me instead of what's best for people who don't appreciate my efforts. I hung up and walked back to the living room. Raymond was still sitting on the couch, but now he was staring at his phone. Amelia's been texting, he said without looking up. She wants to know if you agreed to help us. What are you going to tell her? He set the phone down and looked at me with something that might have been respect. I'm going to tell her that her father is a lot smarter than any of us realized. And then I'm going to suggest that maybe it's time for her to swallow her pride and apologize. I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back. Thomas, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. About the dinner, about laughing when Amelia said those things. I thought I was better than you. You thought wrong. He nodded and walked toward his car. As he drove away, I saw a familiar BMW turning onto my street. Joyce was coming home. But I had a feeling she wasn't coming home alone. I was right about Joyce not coming home alone. Through my study window, I watched as she parked the BMW and waited. A minute later, a silver sedan pulled up behind her. David Chen stepped out, looking like a man walking to his own execution. They stood by their cars for several minutes, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Joyce kept gesturing toward the house, while David shook his head repeatedly. Finally, he grabbed her arm, and they both walked toward my front door. I opened it before they could knock. Joyce, David. I nodded to each of them. This is unexpected. David looked terrible. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. The confidence he'd worn like armor during his affair with my wife had completely evaporated. Thomas, Joyce began, her voice shaking, we need to talk. All three of us? David stepped forward, his jaw tight. I want to hear it from you directly. Did you destroy my business because I was seeing your wife? I gestured them inside. Come in, let's discuss this properly. We sat in my living room, the same space where I'd had so many family gatherings over the years. Joyce perched on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. David sat stiffly in the armchair, his eyes never leaving my face. To answer your question, David, I began, settling into my leather chair, I didn't destroy your business because you were sleeping with my wife. I withdrew my investments because you're a poor business partner who makes emotional decisions and has serious financial management problems. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. These are your restaurant's financial statements for the past 12 months. Revenue down 32%. Food costs up 47%. You've been borrowing against your properties to cover operating expenses. David's face went pale as he stared at the numbers. You owe your ex-wife $143,000 in back alimony. Your business loan payments are 3 months behind. You've been using money from Romano's kitchen to prop up Chen's Bistro, which has been losing money since you opened it. How do you know all this? Joyce whispered. Because I do my research before I invest with anyone, Joyce. David approached me 18 months ago about expanding his restaurant group. I've been monitoring his financial stability ever since. I clicked to another screen. This is why I pulled my funding. Not revenge. Risk management. David slumped in his chair. But the timing was coincidental. I was planning to withdraw from several high-risk partnerships regardless of what happened in my personal life. Your relationship with my wife simply made the decision easier." Joyce stood up abruptly. "Stop talking about us like we're not here. Thomas, I know you're angry, but this has gone too far." "Has it? You've destroyed our family. Emilia is pregnant and homeless. David's losing everything. I can't even buy groceries because you've frozen all our accounts." I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. "Joyce, let me ask you something. How long did you think this could go on?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what was your end game? Were you planning to divorce me and marry David? Were you going to keep both relationships going indefinitely? Or did you just not think that far ahead?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Because if you were planning to leave me for David, you might want to reconsider. David's about to lose his restaurants, his house, and quite possibly his freedom if his ex-wife's lawyers discover he's been hiding assets." David's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you transferred ownership of the glass door to your brother's company 3 months ago to shield it from divorce proceedings. That's called fraudulent transfer, David. It's a felony." The color drained from his face completely. "You can't prove that." I smiled. "I don't have to prove it. I just have to provide your ex-wife's attorneys with the right documents to investigate, which I've already done." Joyce was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Thomas, you're not the man I married." "You're right, I'm not." I stood up and walked to the window. "The man you married was naive enough to believe that providing for his family and being faithful to his wife were valuable qualities. The man you married thought that working hard and building wealth quietly were admirable traits." I turned back to face them. "But you and Emilia made it very clear that those qualities were actually signs of failure. So I decided to become the kind of man you could respect." "This isn't respect," Joyce said, tears streaming down her face. "This is cruelty." "Is it? Because I seem to remember a dinner conversation where my own daughter told me I was a failure, and you sat there nodding in agreement. I remember her saying that you deserved someone better, someone who had actually achieved something with his life." I walked back to my chair and sat down. "Well, now you know what I've achieved. The question is, was it worth it?" David suddenly stood up, his fists clenched. "You manipulative bastard. You knew about us the whole time, didn't you?" "I suspected for about 6 months. I had confirmation for 3 months, and you just let it happen. I wanted to see how far you'd both go. I wanted to understand exactly who I was married to and what kind of man was willing to pursue another man's wife." Joyce was sobbing now, her makeup running down her cheeks. "Why didn't you just confront us? Why didn't you demand that I end it?" "Because I realized something, Joyce. I realized that if I had to demand loyalty and respect from my own family, then those things weren't real. They were just performance." I picked up a folder from the side table and handed it to her. "These are divorce papers. I've already signed them." Her hand shook as she opened the folder. "Thomas, please, we can work this out." "No, we can't. Because you're not sorry that you had an affair. You're sorry that you got caught. You're not sorry that you humiliated me in public. You're sorry that there were consequences." David was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. You've destroyed everything." "I've revealed everything," I corrected. "The only thing I destroyed was the illusion that you and Joyce were somehow victims in the situation." I walked to my desk and pulled out another folder. "David, these are the contracts you signed when you became my business partner. Note Clause 15. Any partner who engages in conduct detrimental to the other partner's personal or professional interests can be removed from all joint ventures immediately." He grabbed the folder and scanned the pages frantically. You planned this." "I planned for the possibility that you might betray me. I didn't plan for you to sleep with my wife, but I planned for the possibility that you might act unethically in some way." Joyce looked up from the divorce papers. "What about Emilia?" "She's your daughter, Thomas. She's pregnant and scared. Emilia is an adult who made adult choices. She publicly disrespected me, supported your affair, and made it clear that she considers me an embarrassment. Now she's dealing with the consequences of aligning herself with people who don't value loyalty or integrity." "She's your child." "Is she?" "Because children don't usually call their fathers failures in public restaurants. Children don't usually laugh along when their stepfathers mock their father's accomplishments." I walked them to the door. You have 2 weeks left in this house, Joyce. After that, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. David grabbed my arm as I opened the door. You can't do this. You can't just destroy people's lives because your feelings got hurt. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. David, you pursued a married woman, convinced her to betray her husband, and used information about my family to manipulate business situations. You destroyed your own life. I just stopped enabling it. I gently removed his hand from my arm. And my feelings aren't hurt. My feelings are finally clear. As they walked back to their cars, I heard David telling Joyce that he couldn't see her anymore, that he couldn't afford to be associated with this situation. Joyce pleaded with him, reminding him of all the promises he'd made, all the dreams they'd shared. He drove away without looking back, leaving her standing alone in my driveway. She looked up at the house one more time, at the windows where warm light spilled out into the evening darkness. The house she'd lived in for 19 years, the life she'd taken for granted, the man she'd dismissed as ordinary. Then she got in her car and drove away too. I watched from my window until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I poured myself a whiskey and sat down to plan the next phase of my life, the phase where I finally lived for myself. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new house, watching the sun set over Lake Travis. The house was smaller than the one I'd shared with Joyce, but it was mine completely. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every book on the shelf, all chosen by me for me. I'd sold the family home 3 months earlier to a young couple with 2 small children. They'd fallen in love with the big backyard and the breakfast nook where Joyce used to sit reading her magazines. I'd thrown in most of the furniture for free, keeping only what mattered to me, my desk, my chair, and a few photographs from better times. The insurance office had given me a retirement party when I'd announced I was stepping down after 21 years. They'd been surprised but understanding. At 59, with my investments providing more than enough income, there was no reason to keep working unless I wanted to. And I discovered that I wanted to do other things. I'd enrolled in a woodworking class at the community college, started volunteering at a literacy program downtown, bought a small sailboat that I was slowly learning to navigate around the lake. Simple pleasures that I'd never had time for when my life revolved around maintaining a family that didn't appreciate my efforts. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting to see a message from my sailing instructor, or maybe the contractor who was building custom bookshelves for my study. Instead, it was from Amelia. "Dad, can we talk, please?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "What about?" "Everything. I need to tell you some things." I considered ignoring it. 6 months of silence, and now she wanted to talk. But curiosity won out over caution. "Coffee tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Lakeway Cafe." "Thank you." The next morning I arrived at the cafe early and chose a table near the window. Amelia was 10 minutes late, which was unusual for her. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. She'd gained weight, which I expected given her pregnancy. But it was more than that. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a cotton shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail instead of professionally styled. She looked tired, but somehow more real than she had in years. "Hi, Dad." "Amelia?" I stood to give her a brief hug. She felt fragile in my arms, smaller somehow despite the pregnancy. "How are you feeling?" "Like a whale," she said with a weak smile. "I'm 7 months along now." We sat down, and an awkward silence stretched between us. The waitress came over, and Amelia ordered decaf coffee and a blueberry muffin. I stuck with regular coffee. "You look good," she said finally. "Relaxed." "I feel good." "The tan suits you. Mom said you bought a boat." "I did, a small one. I'm still learning to sail it without running into other boats." She smiled at that, a genuine smile that reminded me of when she was little and thought everything her daddy did was wonderful. "Dad, I need to apologize." I held up a hand. "Amelia, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, more determined than I'd heard it in months. "I need to apologize, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I nodded. She took a deep breath. "What I said at dinner that night was cruel and untrue. I called you a failure because I was angry at my own life, because things weren't working out the way I'd planned, and it was easier to blame you than to take responsibility for my own choices." Her voice started to shake. "I supported Mom's affair because I thought David represented something glamorous and exciting, and I was embarrassed that my father worked at an insurance office while Raymond's family owned construction companies." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I was so focused on appearances, on what other people thought, that I completely forgot who you actually are. The man who drove me to every soccer practice, who helped me with homework every night, who paid for my college and my wedding, and never once made me feel guilty about the cost." She wiped her nose with a napkin. "I forgot that you taught me to ride a bike and stayed up all night when I had pneumonia in 3rd grade. I forgot that you never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference, even when you had to leave work early." I felt my own throat tightening. "When Raymond lost his job and we lost the apartment, I kept waiting for you to call. I kept thinking you'd come rescue us like you always had before. And when you didn't, I got angrier and angrier." She looked directly at me. "It took me 3 months to realize that you weren't coming because I'd told you not to. I'd made it clear that I didn't want or need your help, that I thought you were worthless." "Emilia?" "No, let me finish. When I found out about your businesses, about how much money you actually had, I was shocked. But not because you were rich. I was shocked because I realized how completely I'd misjudged you." She leaned forward. "You could have been flashy. You could have showed off, could have made us all feel small and dependent. Instead, you quietly built an empire while letting us think we were independent. You gave us the gift of believing we were strong, even when you were the one holding everything together." The waitress brought our order, but neither of us touched it. "Raymond and I are getting divorced," she said quietly. I wasn't surprised, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not, and you shouldn't be. He's not a bad person, but he married me for the wrong reasons. He thought marrying into our family would give him status and security. When that fell apart, he blamed everyone but himself." She rubbed her belly absently. "I'm moving back in with my friend Sarah from college. She has a house in Cedar Park with an extra room. I'm going to work part-time at her graphic design company after the baby comes." That sounds like a good plan. It's a humble plan, a real plan, not a fantasy about marrying rich and living happily ever after. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Emilia, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was angry, even when I was hurt by what you said, you were still my daughter." She squeezed my hand. "I know, that's what made it worse. I knew you loved me unconditionally, and I used that against you. I took your love for granted because I thought it would always be there no matter how badly I treated you. It will always be there. But things can't go back to the way they were, can they?" I considered her question carefully. "No, they can't. Too much has happened. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new." She nodded. "I'd like that." We talked for another hour. She told me about her plans for the baby, her hopes for her new job, her fears about being a single mother. I told her about my sailing lessons, the woodworking class, the volunteer work that was giving me more satisfaction than I'd felt in years. As we prepared to leave, she hugged me again. This time it felt real, not obligatory. "Dad, would you like to be involved with the baby? I mean, would you want to be a grandfather?" I smiled. "I would love that very much." "Good, because this kid is going to need at least one family member who has their life figured out." I walked her to her car, a modest Honda that she'd bought with money from her part-time job. No more luxury vehicles, no more designer clothes, no more lifestyle funded by Daddy's credit cards. "I'm proud of you," I told her as she got in the car. "For what?" "For growing up, for taking responsibility, for becoming the person I always hoped you could be." She cried again then, but these were different tears. Tears of relief, of reconciliation, of hope. As she drove away, I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of people who'd hurt me, but the restoration of relationships with people who mattered. Not revenge, but redemption. I drove home to my lake house, where I spent the afternoon working on a wooden rocking chair. It was going to be my first gift to my grandchild, made with my own hands from wood I'd chosen myself. 3 months later, When Amelia called to tell me she was in labor, I was there within the hour. I held my granddaughter for the first time in the hospital room, this tiny, perfect person who represented hope and possibility and second chances. Amelia had named her Grace. She said it was because she wanted her daughter to grow up understanding that grace, both giving it and receiving it, was one of the most important lessons life had to offer. As I looked down at Grace's small face, I realized that my daughter was right. Grace was indeed the most important lesson. And finally, at 59 years old, I was learning how to live it. Joyce sent a card when the baby was born. She'd moved to Dallas, where she was working as a hostess at an upscale restaurant. David's restaurants had all closed within 4 months, and he'd moved back to California to live with his brother while dealing with his legal and financial problems. I didn't wish them ill, but I didn't wish them well either. They'd become irrelevant to my life, footnotes in a story that was finally being written for my own happiness instead of other people's approval. 6 months after Grace was born, I launched my own business, Hayward Financial Consulting, helping people in their 50s and 60s plan for retirement and make smart investment decisions. It turned out that 21 years of insurance work had taught me quite a bit about helping people protect what mattered most to them. The business grew quickly, mostly through word of mouth. People seemed to appreciate working with someone who understood that financial planning wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, independence, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. On weekends, I took Grace sailing. She was too young to understand what we were doing, but she loved the motion of the boat and the sound of the wind in the sails. Amelia would pack a picnic, and we'd spend the afternoon on the lake, 3 generations learning how to navigate together. Sometimes, as I watched my daughter holding her baby while we drifted across the peaceful water, I thought about that night in the restaurant when my old life ended. The night when I learned that the people I'd been living for didn't value the life I'd built for them. I'd thought that night was the worst thing that could happen to me. Instead, it turned out to be the best thing that could happen to me. Because sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. And what I needed was, right here, the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered, the simple pleasure of time spent doing things I enjoyed, and the deep contentment that comes from relationships built on mutual respect instead of obligation. At 59, I'd finally learned how to live for myself, and it turned out that when you live for yourself with integrity and purpose, the people who matter most will find their way back to you. The rest will simply fade away, like boats disappearing over the horizon, leaving you free to sail toward whatever comes next.